list, but a lot of things going on in Tallahassee, so I'll be talking about each of these briefly. So back in about 2011, at the time it was Division of Environmental Quality, now they're Bureau of Environment and Coastal Management, out of CNMI. They worked with TNC and the DLNR Rota Forestry Program to put together a conservation action plan for Tallahassee watershed. And they went through and identified multiple targets. These are everything from forests to birds to coral reefs to fish. And then they also identified threats to those targets. And one of the biggest ones was sedimentation coming off of the watershed and going down into the reefs, and that was affecting all of the marine side of things, which of course, as the coral program, we're very interested in. So they identified these 5 strategies that they wanted to tackle to start reducing the amount of sediment coming off of the reefs. It includes revegetating eroded areas, and so this is just one snapshot of one area in the wider Tallahassee watershed. You can see very severe erosion. I think you guys have very similar badland areas here on Guam, so this probably looks familiar to you. Another aspect of it is there's also a lot of fires that happen in the area. There's mixed theories and discussions about why those fires happen. I think most people kind of assume that it has to do with the hunting in the area. The hunters are trying to clear out the brush and attract the deer. So fire, of course, then, yes, it does clear out the brush, but then you end up with even more bare soil. So kind of a sister component of this was also a fire prevention effort. So the revegetation work actually began before the Conservation Action Plan. They actually, so the Rota DLNR forestry guys actually started working with NRCS, that's the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service, back in about 2007 or 8, and they started looking at ways that they could try to tackle revegetating these bare areas. And it's challenging because the slopes are crazy and the soil is so eroded away that it's hard to even plant anything in there. So they decided, okay, first we need to just get grass in there to stabilize it. So they were playing around with a bunch of different things for a few years, even before the Conservation Action Plan went into effect. And so what you see here are some of those early efforts at putting in rows on those bare areas. They've, since that time, in partnership with University of Guam Professor Galabi and his student Sidonia, they've been working with DLNR Forestry to improve both the types of grasses they're planting. They switched to vetiver, and the way that they're planting the vetiver to make it more effective at actually stopping condensing, so it actually can stop the sediment that's coming down. And with those efforts, then they've started to slowly have more success. It's filling in nicer. They're seeing less of the little rill erosion coming through. So every year they get volunteers that go out and help them in the revegetation effort. In 2014 was kind of their biggest year yet. They were able to outplant over 40,000 grass seedlings throughout the watershed. They had about, I think it was 19 volunteers that year. And they also have started looking at, okay, now that we've got grass starting to get well established, what's our 5 to 10 year plan on getting the next species? And eventually they'd like to get all of it revegetated with native trees. Fires, as I mentioned, is another of the big components. So I know this is kind of a busy map and it's hard to see, but basically those areas you can see are areas where there have been recent burns. I believe it was 2009, 2012, and 2013 all had areas that were burned. So anyway, just so you guys have an idea of where that how that looks. So in 2012, again, recognizing already that burning was an issue, the division of, or the, again, at the time, the Coastal Resource Management Office, sorry, CNMI is really complicated because they just merged two agencies. They worked on putting together a community survey. They went down to Rota and interviewed a bunch of people in the community, what do we say here, 560 people in the community to get a feel for what people think about the environment, about Talakasa specifically, about the fires, trying to get a sense of the community so they could figure out an effective way to do a social marketing campaign to reduce the amount of fires. This was continued for about a year, and then last year, in partnership with PMRI and MENA, Mariana Islands Nature Alliance, they came in and did kind of a second round of surveys and also did some adjustments to their marketing, their social marketing. And they wanted to see, okay, so what are people feeling now? You know, have they been learning some of the lessons? And it turns out that, yeah, people are learning and the message is getting out. So they're starting to see some positive results. Of course, the next big step is taking those positive, okay, we've learned it and now we hear it, and now is it gonna change our actions? And you know, that's the next phase. Another thing going on, again, I mentioned earlier, Professor Galabi and Sidonia here from University of Guam, working on helping change the methods for the planting. Another thing that we have them do is also start monitoring in the streams for, to try to find a way to best capture, so what is the difference in sediment loss from these revegetation efforts, from these no-burn campaigns? Are we seeing actual effective management? Are we seeing a reduction in sediment loss? So that project went on for about a year and a half, so they got kind of a baseline snapshot. We are working on getting funding to continue the project for at least one more year, so they can see what, you know, what changes are now that the grasses are reestablished. It's something that they're going to have to keep coming back and looking at, though, periodically to see the changes over time in the watershed. There are other efforts going on that are not directly related to the sedimentation, but places where we are hoping to see positive benefit. There is, and Steve McKagan is here, he can talk to you more about this. There's a Rota Creel survey that just started this past year on Rota, so trying to get an idea of fishing in the area, fishing pressure, stocks. Oops. Too far. There's also, CNMI has a long-term benthic data set. They have a marine monitoring team that's been monitoring benthic data, not only in Rota, throughout CNMI, but they do have sites in Talakasa, and so they've been monitoring that over time. They're happy to see that some of the macroalgae has reduced, but it's still higher than they would like it to be. A lot of people were talking about COTS outbreaks. There was a COTS outbreak, and so they saw a significant drop in coral at the time, but it has since rebounded and remains relatively stable. So I think they're pretty happy about that. And hopefully, ideally, we will start to see that coral increase as reduced sedimentation is coming out of the Talakasa Badlands area. And yeah, this is just a little, oh, and I should have said, sorry, if you have questions about this, we do have Liza Johnson, the lead biologist here. You can also ask her questions about this. One of the other kind of positive trends that they're seeing also is they're seeing that the size classes of the coral colonies are continuing up. They're getting bigger, right? So what they